So good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm going to take you through a little journey of a few things and why it's important to care about sharing in a very good manner. And also why I find it very troublesome that a lot of vendors or even countries don't have the capability to share in an adequate manner about actual threats that occur in the world. So I don't like to describe myself with a lot of certs, but I do enjoy the digital rock star lifestyle of getting a tan from fluorescent lighting. And that's my background. So when we originally thought about this whole idea of connectivity, it sounded great. Many times when we connect things, it's functionality over security. We got to get things done. Business people, hey, guess what? We need this product out. We need to have people connect to it. It's a database. That's fine. Unfortunately, things have changed over the years. And I do like to stress that the internet was never designed for business. Never. Its original intention had nothing to do with business. So now that we're in this world where we are very much interconnected, we are faced with the challenges of, since the internet was not meant for business, many of the protocols are not meant to be secure, so they leak. Applications leak. There are challenges if you're a developer and you've got a project manager who doesn't understand the value of putting forward a budget and time for you to actually test at a basic level. It doesn't get tested. My husband is actually a developer, a .NET developer, and that's one of his challenges wherever he has worked. He does, married to me, want to do things about securing his code, but when it comes down to time and budget, he's pushed back. And it's a very common thing. And the thing is that a lot of these things leak, and we know that they leak, and there's always going to be a vulnerability in things. But how do you bring it up properly? And how do you share the information? Now, when I started 39.999 years ago, that's all I'm saying, the threat landscape was very, very different. I remember some of the first viruses where one, we had a marching band going across the screen. We had another one that was very nice enough to try to patch your system. Those were more helpful things. Fortunately, nowadays, the threat landscape has completely changed. It's gone from something where there were a lot of technologists and curiosity to something where the entire landscape is now very much monetized. In addition to that, obviously, the top of the list, when we're dealing with things like foreign governments and nation states, I'm sure you're all aware of the shadow brokers and the recent leaks involving them. We have various governments that can sit on zero-day vulnerabilities. And that actually makes me feel very uncomfortable because you never know who the next person will be in power who has access to those vulnerabilities. And tiny hands kind of scares me. So we've got some interesting challenges, right? Luckily, they don't know very much about cyber warfare, or they'd actually be a challenge. But you also have to think about competition. I used to be the security expert for Lloyd's Banking Group here in London. And at the time, it was quite funny that one of their competitors would forget to change the IP address when they tried to launch a DOS attack against their infrastructure. And it happened on a weekly basis. Yeah. But obviously, a lot of people are scared of these people, you know, the creepy hackers, the glasses-wearing people, for very good reason. We're very curious, and I'm very curious. And unfortunately, our curiosity can sometimes cause harm, but at the same time, our curiosity can expose us to information that maybe we shouldn't have, or it was not intended. So here comes the challenge of trying to share that information appropriately if you happen to find information like that. So if we take a look at any sort of information, intelligence, if you want to call it that word, that you would have to share. You find an issue with the vendor, you find an issue with the protocol, you find an issue with a government website. How you share and what type of information you would need to share. And this becomes challenging because if you're not an Intel expert and you're just a security researcher who loves to make and break things, This is a completely different world of how you have to report information. At the same time, if you want to report this type of information to, say, a national level cert, not that the UK has one anymore, but I deal a lot with the Dutch cert. And they don't actually have a proper reporting structure of what is required, unlike US cert where they actually have a format because it's been well established. So you're kind of left floundering as to what exactly they would need if you're not familiar with this type of stuff. Now, there are other ways to share that I actually prefer if you're not familiar with dealing with law enforcement or certs or you don't want to get tied up with that. Now, here in Europe, you happen to have what I would say the best cert I've ever run into in Europe, and that is the Luxembourg cert. It is Luxembourgish cert, security with a smile. That's what the circle part means. They actually set up this thing called the Malware Information Sharing Platform, where you do not have to be a cert to be a junior member. They have a virtual machine, and what it contains is the newest and greatest TLP white hashes of malware that is coming from all of the certs, both public and private, who happen to be members. And that's very, very helpful for a smaller organization that doesn't have an Aramco budget. And you can also submit as a private party to this by doing it. I find it quite helpful. Obviously, post things, you can share some information up with VirusTotal, for example, if you happen to find some dodginess, and you know it's quite dodgy, and you can go ahead and upload or send a URL link or something for them to go ahead and scan. But there are methods outside of getting involved with law enforcement or national level certs where you can actually try to share some of this information in an adequate manner. And there's even other parts, like in Stack Exchange, and then there's another sharing platform, 4D5A, off of Slack, that also contains some of this information. So we've got a lot of challenges. That's not a really good picture. That's a poor cat. I wouldn't want to be that cat. So we've got all these challenges, right? Number one, I would say ego is a big one. If you are trying to report something to a vendor, many times they don't really want to know that their baby is ugly. I ran into this situation last Tuesday when I did a presentation at a bank, and I showed them, you'll actually see on the slides, that they had been compromised. And their security person was like, oh, all right, well, nice to meet you. I got another meeting. So there's some challenges, because he didn't want to know that his baby was ugly. Vendors, sometimes they don't have a good mechanism to report, or sometimes you might face getting sued, like an AT&T issue over in the United States. They're more litigious than they are in Europe. You might have some sort of liability issues, or you might not want to be that poor security researcher here in the UK, of whom I will not mention his name, that helped with the WannaCry issue, and all of the British media went into his private business and he had to move. Does anybody want that situation? Because I don't. I can't afford to move. I live in Amsterdam. It's too expensive. And this is one of my favorites, too much stuff to report. I have so much stuff, and there is just not enough time in the day to actually report all of these issues. So it can be very overwhelming. And I definitely do not report to certain governments now that I know that can stockpile legally, because I feel very uncomfortable with that. So there are a lot of challenges. So moving forward to today, I love OWASP. OWASP is a great organization. And this year, they went ahead and updated the OWASP Top 10 for 2017 with some new additions. And A4, they merged a category. A7 is a very general one of they didn't put enough attack protection up. And welcome to Web 2.0. It's all controlled by APIs. And very frequently, APIs are not secured very well, which can lead to all sorts of naughtiness. So let's take a look at it. This is just the very first part of the OWASP Top 10, and for the information gathering portion. And I consider this very much, most of it is very passive. These are things that many security researchers or curious people end up finding anyway. They're not directly attacking a machine, but they're finding information in different ways that, say, the web developer or company didn't intend on. So the reason why A1 injection is still high, obviously I changed this because this was actually from a bank, and this was their URL that's been sanitized. And we still have a lot of problems. And for here, that's an account number. That's a problem, right? Now, when I discussed it with this particular bank, although they're in the Netherlands, and it's a requirement in the Netherlands if you are a company of a certain size, that you have to have a responsible disclosure program. It's a law. They actually don't have a secure, adequate one, because it's also the law in the Netherlands that in order to report a vulnerability, it has to be in a secure manner, or you could be liable. So I have to be able to email them or send information in a secure manner, and they don't actually have one. They just have plain text email. So it was only because I was in the bank doing a presentation that I could show them this. That was the only method. So A2, pretty groovy. This is also from part of the bank. Things like expired certificates from 11 years, 3 months ago, and VeriSign True test. It's a little blurry for obvious reasons. They were using a test certificate that was only meant for tests that showed on the certificate, right? Again, I had great difficulty trying to tell them this because I'm also a customer of this bank, so I brought that up too. That was a problem. But these things are still out there. And how do you communicate it effectively? I'm not going to go to the police and tell them that. I mean, it's not appropriate. And unfortunately, the UK doesn't have a cert, but it's also not a thing that you would give to, say, a cert because it doesn't really involve them. So you're really depending on, say, the bank in this case to step up. And it's a big problem. So I just changed around what the actual search parameters are, but I did this last week just to try to show a graphic, and these are just very general expired SSL certs, whether it's on web or it's on mail services or whatever, just a very widespread. And there's immediately showing almost 4 million out there. So it isn't a unique problem. But when I said that sometimes there's too much to report, I can't report all that. That's craziness. That's just absolute craziness. So there's a lot of issues that we still have. A3, I like this one. I have not been able to contact this organization either. They told me to fill out a help desk ticket, and I'm not a customer. So I don't know how I'm going to fill out a support ticket for them. But they are running a stored cross-site scripting in the comments going to Russia. That's a Windows XP for the key boot INI all the way down, and the attacker actually hard-coded the username in, so you know exactly who it is. Isn't that nice? It also ties to a Yandex email account. But again, I haven't been able to contact them, so I've been trying Twitter. That's really depressing, by the way. So there's a lot of problems. A4, this one also discovered last week. I will tell you that the company rhymes with Misco. This is one of two. And I have not been able to adequately contact them. They only have a clear text method. And this is not included on their paid bug bounty program. It's outside, so I literally have no way to securely contact them, except if I try to get them to follow me on Twitter. That's really depressing. It's just so depressing. This is a very common one. And I like to point this one out because this is post-breach. And one of the top ways that I find leaky things is by a misconfiguration. Here we have the Democratic National Party, right? Here's their VPN, right? I actually tried contacting them too. They don't have a responsible disclosure. Fax, yeah. I'm going to have to fax them because it's really depressing. This is one of the worst ones that I found 2 weeks ago. This is a European police officer that works for a European international agency that allows me to screenshot their desktop. And here's an active police investigation, cash investigation for bribery. On this other side, you can't see, it's actually the police officer's schedule. I tried to contact that country's CERT, but I actually got no response, even though it's a European cert, because I thought it was pretty important that I blurred out the pictures, obviously, but to be able to tag into an active police officer's computer, see their schedule, and see an active investigation with an undercover officer. Unfortunately, like I said, I've gotten no response from that cert. Trump Towers, because I can't just show the Democratic National Party without going on the other side, right? So, they got fined because they were running some weak stuff in the United States, in the state of New York last year for 50 grand. So I was given a pen test course, and it was late at night, and I had a friend from Eastern Europe tell me about the debate before the presidential election, something about a 400-pound hacker. I thought at first he was calling me a 400-pound hacker. I was like, dude, I'm not that fat. I mean, seriously, I'm a bit chunky, but I'm not 400 pounds. So he then explained, and I go, give me a few minutes. And within 4 minutes, I found that. And then I double-checked that I can still connect the day before yesterday. I use FileZilla 0.9.39 beta in my pen test course, installed on a Windows XP. On the back end, because you can actually telnet to it, there's other services behind it, and it connects directly to their POS system. I tried to contact them, also by Twitter. I didn't get a response. I had no way to contact them. So anyway, there's a lot of issues. I mean, here is an organization between them, the DNC, well, especially Trump Towers. They should have the money to be able to have this kind of stuff. They should have some sort of responsible disclosure. I can't go to the Canadian police for this. What is the Canadian CERT going to do? It's a private business. So I'm left to, hey, you know, you got a problem. Your customers who pay a lot of money for those hotel rooms, or people who have actually bought condos in this thing. And the payment system is exposed using a very weak, old, exploitable FTP version. Twitter doesn't work in telling people most of the time. And because we're in Web 2.0, this is an unprotected API. You can crawl up and down the users. I can see rewards, goals for this particular membership. It's a very, very large, what is it, multimedia platform with membership videos and all sorts of things. This is just crawling using the next user in the API. It seems that also somebody has already been taking advantage of it, and inside the data machine, they're selling cheats and wares. Again, I've been trying to contact this company. I'm not filling out a help desk ticket. That's crazy. So there's some issues out there, and we still have the same issues, which is kind of depressing. Also, it keeps us employed, so you got to look at it from both sides of the coin. But there's got to be a way that we can more effectively say, hey, you know, company X, bank X, whatever X, you have a problem. Here's the information, and it shouldn't be in a super formalized manner and in a way that exposes a security researcher or private individual to media or any other type of public view. Because sometimes we don't want to be in the public view. So unfortunately, this is now the leak economy. Who has Bitcoins? Anyone? Bitcoins? Yeah, you're buying the drinks tonight. So leaks are now a big business. And there's also now two sides of the coin. You've got security vendors who charge a lot of money for all sorts of indications of compromise, intelligence, things like lists of phishing sites or compromised sites or whatever. So the leakers and the criminals are feeding the vendor economy as well. So it's going back and forth. It's a very interesting dynamic. I would say it's the modern form of big data, I hate that word, gossip at a very large scale. And it's very difficult to try to stay ahead because there's a lot of things connected, a lot of people connected, a lot of different systems, a lot of complexity, and a lot of variables. It's a lot. It's even a mouthful for me to say. So this is a bank. Of course, I sanitize it. Mail server, extreme rat. Port 80 and the client's login over 443. And again, I had a great difficulty. They still haven't taken it down, by the way. I'm a customer of that bank. It kind of pisses me off. But anyway, this is a European power station. I did contact this CERT, and I was not able to get a response. It's running its Modbus. That is an ICS protocol. That's ABB, the vendor attached to it, with the exact version and when it was last updated for the firmware. And that is Extreme Rat. So we have some issues if people can find this type of stuff so easily, but yet cannot communicate effectively with, say in this case, the power station or the CERT that should be notifying them. And it's very unfortunate. So we're going to continue to have leaks. And then we have this problem, where we're running into if somebody's able to get information about your system or you, we have a lot more, I would say, extortion or porn-related malware, where you have instances where if it sees that you're going to a particular porn site, it's got lists, it then tries to embarrass you, right? So then you end up paying a small fee. And this is a problem because sanctioned countries like North Korea, this is one of their modus operandi, so that they can make quick money. And data is valuable. So I did some recent stuff, and this is all from the last 2 weeks, just to show you. You now have ransomware, software as a service. It's pretty groovy. I like that. That, and there's another one called Satan, which is getting really big. So if you don't know how to do it, you just sign up with them, they take their cut, they run most of it, it's fantastic, right? Then, of course, there's vendors who, once they find this information, they can sell you at a very high rate this extra dark web intelligence information, right? Because everything's in the dark web. It makes it sound sexy. There's the exploitation market, zero-day market. This particular bank I'm working with, they didn't pay the ransom, so we call this proof of data to taunt them until they go ahead and pay the 100.70 with the transaction fee coin for a Middle Eastern bank. There are all sorts of ways to launder your money, which is great. Or if you have a problem with that, as soon as you get into hard cash, hey, I like London. I'm not saying anything, but there's a lot of empty houses owned by Russians. Okay. So I do want to say, because I want to leave some time for questions, lots of questions. There is hope. There are ways. If you can't get your information to the appropriate parties, you're here at a fantastic conference. Last evening, attempting to put things in the bags while drinking beer, because, you know, goes hand in hand. I met a lady who happens to work for a particular bank where I found that it looks like a criminal entity had set up people inside that bank to set up accounts, which isn't that unusual anymore. So because I met her, I was able to actually send her the information this morning. So that's very helpful. And most of the time when I find this type of information, I have to leverage my network of people I've met at security conferences to actually get it remediated. So it's very important. We are not attendees, we are participants in these particular types of conferences like BSides. Talk to people, because you never know. And that's one of the best ways to share information. Obviously, test. There are free tools. There are tons of free tools. If you want to see if somebody has left up documents by mistake or a developer left up some test web pages, there's Google. There's this great thing called the Google Hacking Database, where it just gives you the strings to put into Google, and you can find your stuff with site equals, or site:/myorganization.com or .co.uk. So it's a very easy way. Very basic OSINT. OWASP Zap has fantastic testing capabilities for testing any sort of web page. If it runs a web page, it can be compromised like a web page. It can be tested like a web page, whether it's an embedded device or not. It's running the same type of technology. And Telnet will also show you the banners. But there are ways. Now, one of the reasons why we need to try our best to share good information. I was reminded because Shamoon 2 is an ongoing attack and has been since later last year, where it's just a slightly different type of dynamic. When Shamoon 1 occurred, unfortunately, there wasn't a very good, I would say, adequate IT security infrastructure at Aramco. And unfortunately, when they got hit, there were other collateral damages. So after this photograph was taken, because they couldn't get the trucks to load, it was on the automatic loading system, but it was attached to the IT and payment systems, these were shut down. So that's 13 days. How much petrol do you have, right? Unfortunately, Qatar got hit, and at the time, and now as of yesterday morning, it's become quite public, the Saudi Aramco did not collaborate very much with them. because of what was going on with Arab Spring and Al Jazeera at the time and so forth. Fortunately, now Qatar has been kicked out of the cool Sunni Kids Club from the GCC as of yesterday. But these types of things can have very, very bad effects. When a major organization gets compromised and they can't produce what they're supposed to produce, then it can have a knock-on effect that is completely undesirable. In the case of Shamoon 1, it actually threatened the world's oil supply to raise up a barrel of oil to $400 to $450 a barrel if they were unable to keep their production up, because they have such a large market share, right? But if you take a good example of that power plant, I think all of us like electricity because I need to plug in my laptop and then hack all the things, right? And water is tightly associated with that and so forth. And we all like the modern world, and we need to have a way to effectively communicate this information to the organizations that are being affected. Until then, we're going to have to leverage this wonderful BSides network. And I did he wasn't the original one, but he retweeted it. I like Josh. So I like to bring up an idea of bad sharing, kind of like bad touching. This was off the Register about the possibility of the laws changing here in the UK, obviously because there have been some idiots doing awful things, that they want to be able to surveil and see those idiots, right? They want to see what they're planning. They want to see those communications. But on the other side, what happens if it gets too much? And now a friend clarified that this would only affect UK residents or UK citizens. So a person like me who's not from the UK, suddenly some four-letter agency wouldn't demand my laptop. But it's still a very scary thought that people are discussing this type of information because we're all directly affected. I think most of us have probably found one way or another some sort of software vulnerability, whether intentional or unintentional, right? Now, in the UK, you happen to have this group, the Open Rights Group, that deals with privacy. Now, they don't usually take things like the EFF, where you find a big security vulnerability, but they might be changing. Who knows? In the Netherlands, we do have an organization like the EFF, and it's called Bits of Freedom. So if you happen to be in the Benelux region, you can contact them if you're afraid to contact, say, a vendor or a CERT or law enforcement directly, and they will try to anonymize your information. And I do not agree with governments hoarding vulnerabilities and then they get used on a big scale, because that makes me feel very uncomfortable, because other people who are not so honest can use those same vulnerabilities to exploit. Again, you never know who will be in power next. So we know that there's a problem. We know that we all have a boat that's going to leak. We're not going to reinvent the internet tomorrow. So we're going to have to find ways to deal with it, to talk. And sharing doesn't mean, oh, and these are the internal IP addresses that got popped. You can sanitize your conversations. You can sanitize your communications, but still discuss and inform about the threats. There are possibilities and there are ways. But I do stress, leverage your existing network and the network that you're going to extend today. So, by the way, that's a real cat. I didn't know. Who knew? It's a real cat who enjoys swimming and wears a swimsuit. But we know that things will leak. But we're going to have to get used to it, right? We're going to have to deal with it. And we're going to have to find ways to ensure at least our information isn't as leaky. You know, I'm a little biased. So, yes. So I did leave time for questions. So that concludes. So if there are any questions, which I love to answer, please start. And thank you very much.